Hi, my name's Austin Olney. I'm a proud graduate of Mohawk Valley Community College. I even taught there for some time. But I have to admit that for a while I didn't even understand what the Mohawk Valley even was. It's embarrassing. I knew that I grew up in it, but in a way it was kind of like asking a fish what water is. It was all around me. Now that I live downstate, it's clear as day what the Mohawk Valley is, and just what exactly makes it so special. Let's start with the basics. As you can see, I have a 3D model of the Mohawk Valley, and I've exaggerated the topography so you can see how it's a natural corridor in New York State. We're talking a massive area here, going through about 7 counties. And running through the heart of it all, the Mohawk River. A lot has happened here. But in the end, it's really about the people who lived and traveled here. The layers and layers of human experience that makes up this thing we call history. Let's remember that as I try my best to summarize the history of this important area. The story begins with a glacier. A gigantic ice sheet that covered almost the entire state of New York, and then some. It's what would carve out the Mohawk Valley. By about 10,000 years ago, the ice had retreated, and what you have left is various native tribes in the area. One of them, known as the Mohawk, would eventually gain dominance. The name Mohawk was actually a term given to them by a rival Algonquin tribe. It roughly translates to man-eaters. However, they referred to themselves as Kanyen Kehaka, or people of the flint. They were a part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a powerful alliance of native tribes in modern New York and beyond. Due to their location in the valley, the Mohawks were considered the guardians of the Eastern Gate. And in the 1600s, the Dutch began to enter the Eastern Gate. They purchased land from the natives in 1661, and the settlement of Schenectady was founded as a nice farming community along the Mohawk River. However, the British soon took the area over after years of fighting about beavers, and they would welcome German refugees in the early 1700s to help settle the region. And the result was places like German flats popping up. Fast forward to the 1750s, you have the 7 Years' War, which was a major global conflict between the British and French, and the Mohawk Valley became a battleground. There was this important choke point between the Atlantic coast and the Great Lakes, located in the Haudenosaunee Nation of the Oneida, known as the Daowainsta, or Oneida Carry. The British were able to get permission from the Oneida to build fortresses here, and one of them was Fort Bull, which was overrun by the French in 1756, and this would ultimately lead to the Mohawk Valley being abandoned by the British for some time. But they would eventually return in full force to build Fort Stanwix, which would end up playing a crucial role in the next conflict. That's because colonial rebels in the War for Independence used Fort Stanwix to fend off a British attack. And at the same time that was happening, in 1777, the nearby Battle of Oriskany happened, one of the bloodiest fights in the entire American Revolution. It was neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, and it would cause a tear in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy that would never fully heal. For the remainder of the war, there were various skirmishes and raids in the Mohawk Valley, and important clashes like the Battle of Johnstown. When all was said and done and the war was over, it was time to rebuild. A major treaty was made at Fort Stanwix, and this would establish land boundaries. From here, the Mohawk Valley would really begin to transform. Settlements like Whitesboro, Holland Patent, Lee, the town of Western, Marcy, Amsterdam, and more began popping up. You also have counties in the state being organized, like Saratoga, Montgomery, Otsego, Oneida, Herkimer, where the mining of quartz crystals known as Herkimer diamonds was about to kick off, and Schenectady, home to Union College, which was about to establish the first civil engineering program in the U.S. And speaking of engineering, around this time, in the early 1800s, a whole new era was about to begin in the Mohawk Valley and larger United States. And it all started in Rome, New York, where the first shovelful of a massive project known as the Erie Canal would be dug. It was a 363-mile waterway from Albany to Buffalo, dug by hand and without combustion engines or electricity. Although it was preceded by a canal in Little Falls, one of the first canals in the U.S., the Erie Canal was in a league of its own. Suddenly, you could transport goods from New York City to the Great Lakes in a fraction of the time and at a fraction of the cost. And the area was not just a pathway west. It was the pathway west. Yeah, that's right. Before the Big Arch in Missouri, there was a different gateway to the west, and this was it. Towns like Utica went from sleepy little outposts to these bustling centers of commerce. Soon, Fulton County would emerge, and it was hopping with places like Gloversville, which for a short time was the hub of the United States glove-making industry. In addition, the canal attracted waves of new immigrants, all seeking work and opportunity. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, though. There were labor disputes, social unrest, and the displacement of Native American communities. Not to mention, this is before the Civil War, and so you have the Underground Railroad going through many parts of the Mohawk Valley, helping out runaway slaves on their way to Canada. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. You have the first U.S. cheese factory here that would go on to have a global impact, and this was helped by new canals like the Black River Canal. However, a new mode of transportation was on the rise. Some of the first railroads in the U.S. were happening here, like the Mohawk and Hudson, which connected Schenectady to Albany. This would soon evolve into the New York Central Railroad, from the Big Apple to Chicago. And even though the Erie Canal was enlarged in the 1850s and 60s, it was obvious that trains were some serious competition. They were crucial to the U.S., particularly during the Civil War, where you have the Remington factory in Ilion becoming a major supplier for Union forces. Remington would also go on to make the first commercially successful typewriter ever, and it would popularize the QWERTY keyboard layout that we still use on our smartphones and digital devices today. The Mohawk Valley was like a well-oiled machine. You have Rome becoming the Copper City, my ancestors were busy canning, and there's all sorts of innovations, like a trolley line from Herkimer to Frankfort, which would eventually go all the way to Utica. In fact, you could take a stop at the Mohawk Valley Hotel in Mohawk. A final enlargement of the Erie Canal was pushed in the 1900s, known as the Barge Canal. It would utilize parts of the Mohawk River and included structures like the Delta Dam, which flooded the village of Delta to give us Delta Lake. The Barge Canal also gave us the Hinckley Reservoir, which plays a crucial role in supplying water and controlling floods in the valley today. Then there's Prohibition, which ended in 1933, and Utica Club by the FX Matt Brewing Company became the first legal beer sold after Prohibition in the entire country. Skipping ahead, there's World War II and the Rome Air Depot being built for aircraft maintenance and eventually becoming the Griffiths Air Force Base. And after all the railroads and canals that were built in the Mohawk Valley, yet another mode of transportation came along. Cars. In 1954, the first segment of the New York Thruway, or I-90, was opened. It would eventually stretch from Seattle to Boston. And it's interesting to think about how, even though times change, cutting through the Mohawk Valley just seems to always make sense. With that said, the latter half of the 20th century would hit the Mohawk Valley particularly hard. Factories that once hummed with activity began to fall silent. That's not to say there wasn't still important stuff happening in the valley. You have the creation of academic institutions like Utica College, my alma mater, Herkimer County Community College, as well as fun recreational centers and activities like the Woods Valley Ski Area and 15K Boilermaker Road Race. Even though it's often overlooked, the importance of the Mohawk Valley cannot be overstated. It helped the country respond to the 9/11 attacks, and its story is far from over. People harp on it, but nothing can stop this place. Not even a tornado or two. From glaciers to empires, canals to highways, the Mohawk Valley has been at the crossroads of American history for centuries. So if you find yourself driving through these rolling hills, take a minute to explore and see what you might find. Have a good one.